He'll love her, stab her, cage her, whatever keeps her close. Trapped in the Phantom of the Opera, Episode 4. As the circus hype grew, Polly quickly became the talk of the town in New Orleans. The men were all convinced that the circus would be a total failure, and Polly would end up losing everything. Reason 1, Polly was a woman, and no one had ever seen a circus led by a woman. Women wanting the right to vote was already scandalous enough. But now, here she was, strutting through the streets in men's clothes, advertising her circus? Absolutely outrageous. Reason 2, everyone knew the saying, long hair, short wit. Polly may have cut her hair short, but that didn't mean she had any more sense. A circus might be a lowbrow form of entertainment, but even that required a man's wisdom to succeed. Just look at all the successful theater troupes, without exception, all run by men. Did Polly really understand how to run a circus? Did she think that just by putting on a suit and playing a few clever tricks, she could draw a crowd? In high society, it was generally frowned upon for men to gossip about women. But Polly's behavior was so outrageous, and since she was always dressed like a man, many men felt their dignity was being threatened. They began nitpicking her every move. The women, on the other hand, were split into two camps. One side felt Polly's behavior was disgraceful, but since she wasn't exactly a lady to begin with, they chose not to comment. They simply shut their doors and refused to receive her. The other camp thought Polly was quite good-looking. In men's clothing, she exuded a blend of sharpness and soft beauty. They even invited her over just to admire her up close. At this moment, Polly made another bold announcement. Before entering the performance, every attendee must sign a liability waiver. She claimed the show was far too terrifying, and not everyone was suited to handle it. Not everyone had the guts to walk out with that $100 prize. Those with heart conditions, asthma, epilepsy, or other similar illnesses were strictly forbidden from entering. If someone insisted on attending, they'd first have to accompany Polly to the police station to sign a document acknowledging the risk of death or injury due to fright, absolving the circus of any liability. When the police chief heard this, he was initially furious. But then Polly offered him a deal. If he would assign a few officers to attend the show and rate its scare factor, she'd make him a shareholder and give him 20% of the profits every month. The police chief, stunned that his casual opposition had earned him such a deal, immediately shut up. The officers, however, weren't pleased. The chief gets the money, and we have to do the legwork? I'll pass, one officer scoffed. We're already too busy patrolling the streets. Who has time for a circus? Yeah, I'm out too. Miss Clement, we're very much looking forward to your show, but as you know, our workload is enormous. No worries, Polly said with a hint of surprise. I was going to say each officer who sits through the show gets a $100 bonus, but if you're too busy, forget it. She smiled sweetly, tipped her hat, and bowed. Thank you for your time. Suddenly, the officers were very available. They all crowded around, eager to schedule their showtime with her. One particularly eager officer, who'd been the first to scoff, grabbed Polly's arm, worried she might ignore him. But the moment he touched her, a cold and terrifying feeling washed over him. Someone, or something, was watching. His skin crawled. He spun around. Nothing. But when he looked back at Polly, the sensation returned. The office had a fireplace roaring, but the chill creeping up his spine made him break out in a cold sweat. Polly didn't notice the strange episode. She was feeling nervous herself, not because she was afraid of losing money, but because she was scared Erik might actually scare someone to death. Her plan was simple. The format of the performance was inspired by modern haunted houses, but in addition to the freak performers, the most critical NPC was Erik. The original novel had mentioned his greatest joy was leaving people stunned, then proving his brilliance beyond measure. He was born to be a haunted house NPC. Conveniently, he also happened to be a horror movie protagonist. The only issue? Asking him to scare guests was like tossing lambs into a wolf's den. Polly worried that he might lose control and actually kill some of those clueless guests. After much thought, she decided to sneak into every show herself, just in case the haunted house turned into a bloodbath. Day by day, time passed. 2 weeks later, Polly received a letter from Erik. She didn't understand why he had to write it. Couldn't he just say something? The letter contained just one line, written in cold, blade-sharp handwriting. Everything is ready. Signed, E. That was... fast. He had turned an old tavern into her imagined haunted house in just 2 weeks. Then again, the tavern was built in the early 1800s and had been through the Civil War. It already had a network of trapdoors used for hiding. Plus, Polly hadn't been idle either. She'd hired seamstresses to sew all the props and costumes. Still, finishing it all in just 2 weeks? Then again, this was Erik. He could conjure shoes and outfits out of nowhere. If supernatural power existed in this world, it probably resided in him. Polly first wrote a letter to the officers, inviting them to attend that night's performance. Then she wrote a second letter to the gentlemen who had criticized her the most, inviting them to test their courage. She freely admitted this second letter carried a bit of personal spite. They were the ones who kept shouting, "Women have short wits, weren't they?" After finishing the 2 letters, Polly didn't stop. She wrote another article and asked the newspaper manager to publish it on the front page. The headline was even more provocative. "Miss Clement's circus opens tonight. Invitations sent to Mr. A, Mr. B, and Mr. C. Will they dare attend?" Though she didn't name names, New Orleans was small and high society even smaller. Everyone immediately knew who Mr. A, B, and C were. Then, something even stranger happened. One officer publicly declared, "Miss Clement's circus is terrifying. Anyone with a weak heart should stay away. We are not responsible for what happens." It was like a rock thrown into still water. Waves spread fast and wide. On the streets, men, women, children, and loafers all talked about the upcoming show. In gentlemen's smoking rooms and at lavish balls, people whispered about the so-called courage test. And what in the world could have made a police officer say something like that? That evening, the 3 selected officers signed their waivers, glanced at one another, and walked into the tavern with their hands in their pockets, cracking jokes. Polly donned a black cloak and followed them in. They surveyed the decor with the eyes of critics, harsh and unimpressed. "Miss Clement, I think this prop could look scarier, don't you? I've seen better freak shows. Yours is a novelty, but it gets boring fast." "Don't take offense," one said. "We're being honest because we want you to succeed. If we didn't care, we'd take the $100 and leave." Polly smiled kindly. "I don't mind." On the second floor, one officer began feeling bored. "Where are the actors? Are we just going to keep walking?" It had only been 2 minutes. Polly remembered this one. Henry, the scoffing officer. Rude, loud, cocky like a rooster. "Whatever," Henry said. "For $100, I'll pretend to be scared if a reporter asks." Polly said nothing. She slipped into the shadows, just as Erik had taught her. When Henry turned and saw she was gone, he just shrugged and kept walking. Before the show, Polly had given him a card, his assigned character. He barely glanced at it before tossing it aside. He was supposed to play a deformed woman. That disgusted him. Like most men, Henry looked down on women. The idea of a woman running a circus? Laughable. If not for the money, he wouldn't be here. Every room had story cues and script prompts. Henry ignored them all. He acted like reading instructions made him less of a man. The other 2 officers were engaged, discussing the storyline softly. Henry scoffed at them. 10 minutes later, the other 2 decided to follow the script and explore Marbelle's backstory. Henry found an excuse to split off. Waste of time, he thought. Better to finish quickly and claim the money. But as he walked down the hall, a chill crawled up his back. That being watched sensation returned. He stopped and turned. "Nothing. I know what you're trying to do," Henry said flatly. "Scare me into quitting so I forfeit the money, right? Your lady boss probably said, 'Scare the strong guy and keep the cash.'" No reply, but the feeling lingered. Henry pushed down his unease and continued forward. Then, scratch, scratch, soft, eerie sounds came from a door, like nails clawing at the wood. Something trying to get out. He frowned, grabbed the doorknob, and flung the door open. Empty. Just a room. He knew it was just street-level trickery, but his heart raced. Sweat dampened his back. The feeling returned. Someone was standing behind him. Henry spun around, and this time he saw it. A woman, crawling toward him with 4 grotesquely deformed legs, face twisted, hair in tangles, nails scraping the floor, leaving behind streaks of pain. Behind her, a towering giant holding a carpenter's saw. He grabbed her hair, lifted the saw, and began sawing into her legs. The sound of flesh and bone tearing echoed through the hall. Blood and tissue flew everywhere. The woman screamed, high, shrill, inhuman, clawing chunks of meat from her own scalp. Henry froze, stomach turning, nausea rising. The saw's screech grew stranger, like a meat grinder or a juicer, harrowing. Then Henry heard her cry, "Help me. He's cutting off my legs to make specimens. Please, help." The giant looked up. "You want to save her?" he asked, expression blank. "Then let me cut off your legs instead." This isn't real, Henry told himself. But the blood looked too real. Warm, thick, reeking of iron soaking into his shoes. The chunks of scalp in her hair were too detailed. Henry's gut twisted. He nearly retched. "You can't scare me," he forced out. "That money's mine. I won't quit, no matter what you throw at me." But the giant said nothing. Step by step, he dragged the bloody saw toward Henry. A million thoughts raced through Henry's mind. Maybe this wasn't a show. Maybe Polly wasn't a manager. She was a serial killer. Lure the victims in, slaughter them for fun. How else to explain the blood, the flesh, the pain in the woman's eyes? That eerie feeling of being watched, like they had planned this. Henry reached for his gun, only to remember he'd left it outside before the show, on Polly's request. She said no weapons were allowed. He hadn't thought twice. Handed it over to her assistant. Now, it all seemed like a setup. The giant was getting closer. Too close. Henry ran, but the tavern was small. The hallway, narrow. He hit a dead end. The giant loomed over him, stooped under the low ceiling. That feeling of being watched, it was back. Henry's panic surged. His back was against the wall. And yet, someone was watching. From inside the wall. Then, two hands reached out of the wall, grabbed him hard by the ribs. His blood froze. His chest seized. He felt like he was drowning in a frozen lake. Hands. From inside the wall, the giant raised the saw. Hot liquid dripped on Henry's face. The woman's blood. Not fake. The saw's blade gleamed with red and white bone fragments. Too real. Henry's eyes widened. His heart spasmed. Breath quickened. And everything went black. He passed out. Polly, watching from the shadows, signaled the other two officers over to witness the final act. From their angle, the scene looked a bit fake. The giant's expression was wooden. Emily's performance slightly over the top. But Henry, terrified, staggering, collapsing, looked genuinely traumatized. The officers exchanged glances. They never thought the loud, arrogant Henry would be the one to pass out first. Polly said softly, "This isn't our fault. You saw it yourself. No one touched him." "True," one officer nodded. "Henry just fainted. He's the one with the weak nerves." "But your show is risky," the other officer said. "We'll have to warn the public in the papers. People with poor mental fortitude shouldn't attend. Are you okay with that?" Polly almost burst with joy. She wanted to hug the man. Clearly, he didn't understand reverse psychology, or phrases like, "not for the faint of heart," "scary content ahead," or "viewer discretion advised." Polly could already imagine the buzz that warning would create. But she merely put on a regretful expression and said, "I understand. I'm truly sorry. I didn't expect things to turn out this way." The two officers comforted her and carried the unconscious Henry away. The lights came back on in the tavern. Polly praised every performer, especially Emily. "Your performance was incredible. You were born for the stage." Emily had been drowning in grief for so long, but by reenacting her trauma to frighten the normal people, she felt lighter, like a burden had been lifted. She didn't say much. She wasn't one for words, but she hugged Polly tightly and whispered, "Thank you." Theodore gave her a respectful nod. "Thank you." Polly had always been wary of him, never expecting much. But his performance had stunned her. He'd knocked out a police officer. She didn't hold back her praise. After the others left, Auntie Freeman came in with a bucket and started scrubbing the blood from the floor. Polly chatted with her for a bit, said goodnight, and walked toward the tavern's front door. But halfway there, a gloved hand reached out, grabbed her wrist, and yanked her into a hidden trapdoor. Erik. This was the first time they'd been this close in a long while. Compared to before, his scent had changed. No more sweat and blood, not just plain soap either. There was cologne. Polly blinked, leaned closer, and sniffed. Yep, cologne. Dry like cypress wood, sharp like a blade, laced with a bitter, burning edge. He suddenly gripped her jaw, turned her face away. his breathing ragged, like he was struggling with something. Polly couldn't tell what he wanted. He dragged her in, but wouldn't let her near him. Wore cologne, but wouldn't let her smell him. She thought for a second. Then a light bulb went off. Was he waiting for a compliment? She tried gently. Sorry, I forgot to say, you were amazing tonight. If it weren't for you, the performance wouldn't have been such a success. The moment she said it, his gloved hand covered her eyes. The last thing she saw was the sharp angle of his jaw under the white mask, and the deep red flush spreading down his neck and ears, like a rash. And in that moment, Polly had just one thought. So last time, it wasn't an allergic reaction. He was blushing. Polly batted her eyelashes and continued, really, if you hadn't hypnotized Henry, the other actors wouldn't have performed so well. That guy was such a pompous jerk. If our first show had flopped, the troupe would have taken a huge hit. Thanks to you, we avoided that. As she spoke, she tilted her head slightly, and her thick lashes brushed against his black glove. Even through the leather, Erik could feel the tickle of her eyelashes. Like feathers. Like sand. A strange chill rippled through his scalp. His voice turned cold and rigid. I didn't drag you in here to hear flattery. Polly didn't notice anything off, but Erik did. He had terrifying control over his voice. He could speak without moving his lips, manipulate volume, tone, and direction at will, making his voice seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. Yet this was the first time it had sounded wrong. Polly. Then, why did you let me talk so long? She forced a polite smile and said, so what did you drag me in here for? Whispering sweet nothings? After a long pause, his cold voice sounded by her ear. The performance format you designed is novel. Its success was inevitable. Oh, he had pulled her in just to compliment her? Polly's heart warmed. She was just about to hug him and say thank you when he continued coldly. But your judgment needs work. Theodore has no talent for acting. If he hadn't met you, he would have spent his life performing cheap tricks in a circus. You don't need to waste such exaggerated praise on him, Polly. She never expected Erik's first long speech to her would be about Theodore. She began, trying to defend her assessment. I know he's a little stiff on stage. I praised him to encourage him. It's just a way to keep people loyal. He was silent for a moment. Then his voice turned strange again. You want to keep a mediocre man loyal? Polly explained patiently. It's not about whether he's mediocre. Theodore works for me. As long as he performs with effort, I'll praise him. That way, people feel like working under me is worth it. She didn't get to finish. Erik suddenly pressed down hard, grabbed her by the neck, and slammed her against the hidden chamber wall. His eyes burned with aggression. His movements were rough. The leather of his gloves cracked slightly, scraping against her neck and sending an odd, itchy sensation across her skin. Polly grew a little distracted. She instinctively grabbed his wrist. Before she could say anything, he abruptly let go, turned his head to the side, and swallowed several times. His breathing was even heavier than hers. Polly blinked in confusion. What's wrong? Did I say something bad? Erik glared at her coldly. She hadn't said anything wrong, but every word felt like a knife, grating, irritating, infuriating. Maybe that was the real problem. The chamber was cramped and suffocating, yet his breathing grew more ragged, broken, desperate. His jaw trembled as he struggled to control it, worried he might be short of breath. Polly gently patted his back. Calm down, breathe. Take it slow, don't work yourself up like this. He stared at her, eyes so cold they chilled her bones. In the past, Polly would have believed he was about to kill her. But now, he simply grabbed her wrist and shoved her out through the hidden door. Polly? Luckily, she had great emotional control. Erik had been like this for a while now. She was used to his unpredictable moods. After a couple seconds of confusion, she just shrugged and walked away. Compared to Erik's attitude, she was more interested in whether those three gentlemen had seen her provocation in the newspaper. 1 day passed. 2 days? No reply from them. They seemed to believe that ignoring her would make her go away. But Polly wasn't about to waste such a perfect promotional opportunity. She published another article, writing, "What makes a gentleman? Only men who are honest, brave, righteous, respectful of women, helpful to others, and of respectable status can truly be called gentlemen. Those three gentlemen who gossiped behind my back are not respectful of women. Pretending not to see my article is not honest. Refusing to accept my courage challenge is not brave. If they count as gentlemen, then the South has truly fallen. Polly had said this on purpose. The North-South rivalry in America had deep roots. Southerners believed Northerners were brash, crude, and unrefined, willing to chant "free the slaves" just to win a war and drag the whole country into chaos. Northerners, meanwhile, thought Southerners were stubborn, closed-minded, and resistant to change. But after the war, many Northerners still wanted to cozy up to Southern aristocrats and claim the title of new nobility. Polly had done her research. Those 3 gentlemen all came from prestigious Southern families. 2 of them had married Northern women just to maintain their current status. Without those marriages, they'd be plowing fields by now. As expected, her article hit a nerve. The 3 gentlemen could no longer stay silent. They published scathing responses in the newspaper, accusing Polly of having ulterior motives and stirring up trouble. A woman who argued so cleverly couldn't possibly be decent. It was only natural for gentlemen to criticize her. As gentlemen, they simply didn't criticize respectable women. But Polly, dressed in men's clothes, doing business like a man, flaunting herself in public, even bribing the police to promote her circus, was clearly shameless. So why couldn't they call out a shameless, low-class woman? Now the police department got dragged into it too, and had to step in. The police chief issued an official statement. The department did not accept bribes from Miss Clement. The warning published by our officer was purely out of goodwill. After all, Officer Henry Jensen is still unconscious, in the hospital from excessive fright. The entire city had never seen a scandal this massive, involving so many parties, even the police. Everyone followed the drama eagerly and gossiped nonstop. Whenever the 3 gentlemen didn't publish a rebuttal, nosy citizens would go to their homes and ask, "Why aren't you responding? Are you planning to take Miss Clement's courage challenge?" The 3 gentlemen were livid. They tried to shift focus by attacking Polly's lack of virtue. But Polly couldn't care less about virtue. Even after seeing their vicious editorials, she still rode past their mansions in men's clothes, looking bold and unbothered. In that era, lacking feminine virtue was a serious accusation, especially when it came from gentlemen in print. A proper woman, accused like that, would have probably jumped in a river. But Polly? She laughed with neighbors and strolled the streets like nothing had happened. She seemed to have an invisible force field around her. Shameless, invulnerable. Finally, the 3 gentlemen gave in. They agreed to take her courage challenge. Polly didn't actually have a super strong personality. When someone bashed her performance, she'd still get upset for a few days. But this was the 19th century. Letters, newspapers, stagecoaches, factories, even rumors moved at a snail's pace. Even arguments had a delay. It wasn't like the internet where you got real-time feedback. Fighting those 3 in the papers meant she'd write an article, then wait days to see them rage in return. Honestly, drifting bottles on early social media were more satisfying. She could only say their loss was due to never having used the internet. But Polly wasn't done with them. She dressed in men's clothes and, with help from a few friendly ladies, located the wives of the 3 gentlemen. They were attending a book club gathering at a villa. About a dozen women were in the sitting room, young, pretty wives and daughters of upper society. When Polly entered, the room fell silent. Everyone had heard of Polly Clement. She was infamous. No woman had ever dared challenge men publicly, let alone 3 prominent men. They were both scared and fascinated. What kind of woman dared do such a thing? What they didn't expect was... Polly looked so unusual. Her features were delicate and pretty. She wore a white suit with a wide-brimmed hat. Her legs were long and straight. These women had seen women in men's clothes before, but Polly didn't try to look like a man. In fact, she wore a woman's wide-brimmed hat trimmed with ostrich feathers, a mix of male and female attire. Strange. And yet, on her, it worked. Her smile wasn't boyish. It was sweet, radiant, like biting into a piece of juicy fruit. The women exchanged looks and whispered. One woman couldn't hold back. She put down her book and stood up. Oh my God, you're so pretty. Can I touch your legs?" Polly found it a little odd, but smiled politely. "Sure." The woman lightly touched Polly's leg and exclaimed again, "Wow, so long, so smooth. I've never realized women could have such legs." An older woman scolded her, "Mrs. Garcia, that's very inappropriate." A few others giggled. "Miss Clement, don't mind her," one woman said. "Mrs. Garcia has no self-control around pretty girls. And with you dressed like that," more laughter. Polly smiled calmly, unbothered. It's all right. I came to speak with Mrs. Davis, Mrs. Met, and Mrs. Wright. Oh, I see. You're here to warn them, aren't you? Someone asked. Of course not, Polly said. Just a friendly heads up. The performance is a bit dangerous. You may heard that a police officer fainted from fright. That's not an exaggeration. For safety, I'd prefer if you watch the performance from the side. That way, if anything happens, you'll be nearby, and more importantly, you'll witness your husband's completing the challenge with your own eyes. The ladies hadn't expected Polly to come just to look out for the wives of her enemies. It was oddly gentlemanly. After all, they'd all seen how those three had publicly attacked Polly, trying to ruin her reputation. After a long pause, Mrs. Davis finally said, "Thank you for taking the time to tell us. We'll be there to observe." "I'm relieved to hear that," Polly said, removing her hat and placing it over her heart. She bowed deeply. "Sorry for disturbing your gathering. Good day." She left the room with grace. Only after the door closed did the women start whispering again. God, she's real. What kind of woman wears that and shows off her legs without shame? But she is beautiful. Another sighed. I wish I'd touched her legs too. Like Mrs. Garcia. A younger woman, Miss Jones said coldly. I'd never touch a woman like her. She's filthy. A lady by the fireplace chuckled. Oh, Miss Jones, you're still young. You don't understand Miss Clement's charm yet. After you get married and have to face your dreadful husband every day, you'll see her appeal. Mrs. Garcia keeps so many girls in her house, but none are as beautiful or as spirited as Miss Clement. Another asked playfully, Mrs. Garcia, why didn't you ask for a hand kiss from her? Her lips look so soft. The room erupted with laughter. Miss Jones blushed furiously. She opened her mouth to scold them, but just then the chandelier above began to sway violently. Panic broke out. The younger women screamed. The older ladies tried to stay calm. It's probably just loose hardware, don't panic. But a moment later, crystal pieces rained down like a storm. That wasn't the worst part. The truly terrifying thing was, several women appeared to be having intense hallucinations. The one who joked about Polly's lips screamed that her mouth had melted, turning into a pool of blood. Mrs. Garcia cried hysterically, swearing there were venomous insects crawling across her hands, and then fainted. Perhaps the atmosphere had gotten to her. But Miss Jones, too, began seeing horrific visions. She looked down at her own hands and watched in horror as her fingers stretched, softened, and melted, dripping into foul, sticky pools of blood. It was as if she were being punished for that earlier line. I'd never touch a woman like her. She's filthy. Polly had invited the wives of the three gentlemen to observe the performance for two reasons. First, to distance herself in case something went wrong. Who knew how strong those men's nerves were? What if Erik scared them to death? Second, so those three would completely lose face in front of their wives and never again have the nerve to challenge her publicly. In addition, Polly had invited the previous officers back to watch the show. The officers had seen how the gentlemen had slandered them in the newspapers. True, they had technically accepted a bribe to attend Polly's show, but the bribe had gone to the police chief, and since Henry had fainted from fright, none of them had received the promised $100. So now that the gentlemen were publicly dragging their names, it was slander. The officers were caught in a strange emotional limbo. On the one hand, they would love to see the gentlemen humiliated. On the other hand, they also hoped the men would pass the test of courage, to win back some of the masculinity Henry had lost. Polly had no idea what kind of inner struggle the officers were having. She simply announced in the newspaper that journalists from all outlets were welcome to attend and rate the gentleman's performance. This declaration sparked yet another wave of public debate. Some said Polly was just showing off. Who could truly define courage anyway? Was it eating bugs and snakes? Or fighting a bear? Not everyone was like that one cowardly officer who fainted at a circus. Others speculated that Polly had made a mistake by inviting reporters. What if the journalists sided with the gentlemen? If they insisted the gentleman had acted bravely, how could Polly argue? People scoffed, saying, women will be women, unfit for business. Even if she had the upper hand for now, she'd soon get cocky and expose her flaws. Polly remained completely unaware of the street gossip. The locals here were quite reserved. Even if they talked behind her back, they still tipped their hats politely when they saw her. The ladies, too, acted like they were against her. But every day, Polly opened her mailbox to find piles of letters. Aside from a few vulgar insults, most were covert invitations from women. asking if she'd like to attend local book clubs, dance socials, and other events. At that moment, Polly wasn't worried about whether the three gentlemen would be scared. She was more concerned about reminding Erik not to actually kill them. Lately, no matter what she said, Erik had been completely unresponsive. And yet, she noticed he still read her newspaper articles, and sometimes even left a few brief comments, just like before. Polly had no idea what had offended him. After thinking it over, she suspected it had to do with her attitude toward mediocrity. She told him she often praised the average just to keep them motivated. To Erik, that might have been an unforgivable offense. He might have had a twisted sense of chivalry toward women, but when faced with a mediocre woman, his critique would be brutally honest, even cruel. She remembered once going to the opera with him. Polly didn't know much about opera. She couldn't understand what the soprano was wailing about. But the pitch was on point, the breath control steady, and the diction clear, so she thought it was fine. So, when Erik stepped behind her and asked for her opinion, she casually said, "Not bad." He paused, then replied coolly, "If that's your standard, I might as well have taken you to the zoo. The howls of wild beasts might have salvaged your pitiful taste in music." Polly. Excuse me? She was suddenly very glad she had never tried to impress him with her singing. With his standards, she'd probably have died on day one. She vowed never to tell him she could sing. Erik's standards for talent were terrifying, and yet she had stood there and told him she praised every mediocre performer just to make them more obedient. To him, that might have felt like a personal betrayal. Still, his reaction had been unusual. His breath had gone heavy, his jaw clenched so hard it trembled. It was too intense. Polly eventually gave up trying to understand him. She figured he was young. It was normal to be moody sometimes, although most of the time it was hard to believe he was actually younger than her. He was too cold, too dangerous, too quiet. Only when he stopped hunting could you sense the age gap. Polly decided to apologize. Back in her room, she changed out of her male clothes, slipped into pajamas, and pulled a sheet of stationery from the drawer, intending to write a heartfelt apology. Ever since Erik had stopped showing himself, she'd had no other way to communicate with him. Just as she started writing, the gas lamp on her desk suddenly went out. Darkness filled the room. A tall shadow loomed over her. The familiar scent closed in. Polly wasn't frightened, just puzzled. After last time, she had replaced the candles with a gas lamp, yet somehow he could still snuff it out at will. How did he do it? Could he teach her? That way, she wouldn't have to get up to turn off the light at night. At that moment, Erik's voice broke her train of thought. "You wanted to talk to me?" His voice was cold and clear, as always. Polly rubbed her ear, nerves tingling. "I just wanted to explain something." "What is it?" "I think we had a little misunderstanding," she said earnestly. "When I praised Theodore, I wasn't validating his talent. In fact, ever since I saw what you can do, no one else has ever impressed me." There was a pause. He asked, "What talent?" Polly hesitated, then replied, "Magic, ventriloquism, music, hypnosis. Auntie said you're a master of trapdoors, but I think your architectural knowledge goes far beyond that." She wiped her forehead, a bit nervous. She almost let it slip that she knew he was a master architect, but Erik had never told her that. She couldn't expose it now. He didn't respond. So Polly continued, "You probably think I'm just flattering you, but I'm not. You're the most talented person I've ever met. What you've mastered, most people couldn't even learn one of those in a lifetime, and yet, you're already a master in all of them." To calm him down, she racked her brain to string together every compliment she could think of. "You've changed how I define genius. With that in mind, how could I possibly mean it when I praise someone like Theodore?" His voice was flat. "So, what are you really trying to say?" "I'm saying, don't be mad, okay?" Polly turned around and held his hand. "I know how you feel about mediocrity. I won't praise Theodore like that again." Erik wanted to ask himself, why was he so angry? As Polly said, Theodore was mediocre. Aside from being nearly 8 feet tall, he had no redeeming qualities. Theodore was taller than Erik by 1.7 inches, but Erik could strangle him with one hand, and Theodore wouldn't even fight back. He was big, slow, and mentally weak. Erik wouldn't even need hypnosis to get him to shoot himself. So why did Polly's praise for such a man fill him with rage? The problem wasn't him, it was her. Just kill her. Then this throbbing pain in his chest would disappear. He wouldn't get thrown off balance every time she said something. Erik stared at Polly's throat and slowly reached out his hand. She was completely defenseless. She even tilted her head and rested her cheek against his black leather glove. Erik didn't notice it, but the moment she touched him, his heart skipped a beat. He just kept staring coldly at her neck. With just a bit of pressure, her breathing, voice, warmth, heartbeat, everything would disappear. There would be no more Polly Clement in this world. But then she suddenly grabbed his wrist and softly kissed the glove. "Don't be mad, okay?" she said gently. Her kiss sent a jolt down his spine. He wanted to push her away. Then he noticed her lips. Red, moist, soft, parting slightly to reveal white teeth. Her lips looked so soft. The thought hit him like a curse. He suddenly wanted to press something inside. A finger. A tongue. He recoiled in horror. He stepped back and turned his head, his breathing choppy and uneven. But the image of her lips was burned into his vision. His temples throbbed. His heart pounded violently. Polly looked concerned. "What's wrong?" Several seconds passed before his hoarse voice finally responded beside her ear. "I'm not angry." Polly pretended to believe him. "That's good." Erik turned, clearly intending to leave. Only then did Polly remember her real reason for calling him. She grabbed his hand, accidentally interlacing their fingers. Before she could react, he jerked his hand away. His voice wavered slightly. "Is there something else?" By now, Polly had a pretty good read on his temperament. If she bluntly told him not to scare the gentleman to death, he'd probably get angry again. She had no idea why he got angry so easily. Was he going through puberty or something? She needed to use the same trick as before, just a little physical contact to soften the blow. So she stepped forward and hugged him. Again, she was struck by how male his body felt. It wasn't her imagination. His shoulders and waist had grown firmer. Not just a towering skeleton anymore. "There's just one more favor," she said softly. "I know you're very disciplined. And I know helping with the show is already a big favor. But still, I hope, during tomorrow's performance, don't scare them too badly." She smiled slyly. "I want them to watch themselves lose face, consciously. Like Henry fainting on the spot? That'd be too merciful. Deal?" With that, she stood on tiptoe and kissed his white mask. It wasn't the first time. But as always, the moment her lips touched the mask, Erik's scalp tingled. His hair stood on end. His ears burned. His chest felt like it would explode. When he came to, his hand was on her jaw, forcing her mouth open. Polly didn't resist. She looked confused, but completely obedient. Yet the more submissive she was, the angrier he became. Recently, he was always angry. It was an emotion so intense, so alien to his usual calm. It scared even him. He stared at her lips and thought, if I just follow the impulse and slide my finger in, would that stop the rage? But clearly, what he wanted wasn't her lips on his finger. It was his tongue. Her lips were so soft. He was more despicable than those other women he despised. Because at this moment, all he could think was, her lips are so soft. Could they wrap around my tongue? And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, she leaned forward and kissed his hand again, right on the black glove. For one insane second, Erik was jealous of a glove. Polly, oblivious to his torment, asked softly, "So, we're good now?" Erik's hearing was so sharp he could catch the tiniest sounds, her breath, her swallow, even the saliva pooling at the back of her tongue. Every sound burned in his ears, making them sting. After a long moment, he replied in a low voice, "Got it." By the afternoon of the next day, the tavern was surrounded by a sea of onlookers, curious citizens crowding in to catch the action. Polly had arranged for the newspaper reporters to sit in a hidden spot, one where they could observe the entire performance without interfering with the gentleman's immersive haunted house experience. Upon hearing about this, the police officers deliberated for a while before deciding to discreetly warn the three gentlemen. Polly was getting too popular. If all three gentlemen got scared, she might skyrocket to fame as the most well-known woman in town. That would be a disaster. It could set a terrible example for all the ladies in the city, encouraging them to parade around in public like Polly. If that happened, the officers' workload would explode. Women were delicate creatures after all, and always needed male escorts in public. Otherwise, they'd become targets for teasing or worse. No officer wanted to end up babysitting a flock of frail ladies every day just because Polly had stirred up trouble. So, They tracked down the three gentlemen and warned them. Polly's performance was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Inside the tavern, they would each play a character. Only by collecting clues and solving puzzles could they make it out. Only those who exited the tavern could say they had completed the full show. The officers added that Officer Henry had fainted from fright because he'd drawn the character card Marbell. If any of them drew that card, they should either ask Polly for a replacement or stay close together and be extra cautious. Otherwise, Henry's fate might repeat itself. The gentlemen, Walter, Mitt, Wright, and Davis, listened in silence. Mitt was a striking young man, and the most prominent of the three in both background and ambition. Wright and Davis weren't particularly eager to be in the spotlight. When Polly published the article saying they weren't true Southern gentlemen, they were ready to back out, only to be forced to stay by Mitt, who insisted they teach Polly a lesson. During the newspaper debates, Wright and Davis had been stunned by Polly's shamelessness. They had never encountered a woman so hard to deal with. In their eyes, any respectable woman would have thrown herself into a river in shame after being called out for improper conduct. Never underestimate the power of such an accusation. In high society, what mattered most? Reputation. Among the upper class, both men and women guarded their reputations fiercely. Lose it, and your neighbors would stop greeting you. Invitations would vanish, and you'd be excluded from all clubs and gatherings. That was how the world worked. Everyone feared social ostracism. But Polly? She acted like her reputation meant nothing. At Mitt's urging, Wright and Davis hurled the most venomous insult they had ever used on a woman. Unvirtuous. Any decent lady would have collapsed from the blow, locked herself indoors, and avoided the public for weeks. But Polly? She acted like she hadn't heard a thing, still strutting around in men's clothes, going about her business. Wright and Davis had nearly given up. Normally, if they even uttered a curse in front of a woman, they'd apologize profusely. Arguing with Polly like this felt utterly disgraceful. Mitt remained unfazed. It just proves she isn't a respectable woman. If you call a courtesan unvirtuous, it won't bother her. Wright and Davis exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't think Polly was respectable. But calling her a courtesan still felt like a stretch. Still, they didn't argue with Mitt. No need to pick a fight over Polly. So, what should we do now? Davis asked. I visited Henry Jensen in the hospital. The doctors all said he was hospitalized due to extreme fright. Gentlemen, Mitt replied lazily, this immersive format might be new, but now that we know there'll be jump scares, it's hardly threatening. Unless you're a total coward, I don't see how anyone could be scared into unconsciousness. But the officers seemed sincere, Wright said. Those freeloaders have been useless for years, Mitt sneered. They probably took Polly Clement's money and are just here to rattle us. Wright and Davis were convinced. But just as they were finishing their preparations and getting into the carriage to head to the tavern, their wives stopped them with anxious faces. After Miss Clement visited us that day, Mrs. Davis began hesitantly. Something very strange and frightening happened. Allow me, Mrs. Wright said, stepping forward. We were holding a book club gathering when Miss Clement showed up. She somehow found us and invited us to attend your test of courage. She behaved perfectly normally. But after she left, she drew a deep breath and exchanged glances with the other two ladies. Her face still pale, all of us started having vivid hallucinations. It was like we were possessed. That's enough, ladies, Mitt cut in coldly, not even looking at his wife. Thank you for the warning. We'll be extra careful. As the three men boarded the carriage, Wright looked uneasy. Catherine never lies. Maybe Clement really does have some supernatural power. Davis was about to say something, but Mitt scoffed. You actually believe women's nonsense? The two fell silent. When the carriage reached the tavern Polly had rented, the driver was stunned by the sight before him. People filled the entire street. Maybe not the whole city had shown up, but at least half of it had. Mitt remained expressionless. He admitted the performance format was innovative, but that was all. As a man, he believed Polly could never grasp the breadth of his world. When she was learning embroidery at home, he was already traveling through Europe, seeing more of the world than she could ever dream of. How could she possibly scare him? Mitt stepped down from the carriage, stone-faced, only to spot Polly standing at the entrance. To avoid giving the gentleman any excuse to criticize her, Polly had switched into a dress, a tea-green gown with a misty sheer overlay. She wore a wide-brimmed hat tilted slightly to one side. The brim undulated like lotus leaves, revealing half of her delicate, striking face. Her brown eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint, like claws ready to strike. Mitt froze. He'd seen Polly before, in men's clothes, walking past his house. Wright had called him over to look. Mitt had casually set down his cards and glanced out, unimpressed. Who would have thought, once she put on a dress, she'd be so captivating? Wright and Davis were equally stunned. What shocked them more was how Mitt's previously impatient face suddenly softened. He stepped forward and greeted Polly politely. "Miss Clement, a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Wright and Davis were floored. They'd heard him curse her countless times in private, and now he was acting like a gentleman. Polly tilted her head. "Are you Mr. Davis?" "I'm Mitt," he said slowly, eyes fixed on hers. "Walter Mitt." Polly nodded with a pleasant smile. "Ah, Mr. Mitt. This way, please." She led them into the tavern, handed them the liability waivers, and explained the performance guidelines. Mitt never stopped staring into her eyes. He was confident in his looks. No woman could resist his handsome face for long. Once Polly took a proper look at him, he was sure he could win her over. But Polly, almost like she could read his thoughts, never once looked directly at him. "Gentlemen," she said sweetly, "please draw a card, your character for the performance." Mitt drew one, flipped it over. "Marbell." Wright whispered, "The officer said this one's risky. Should we switch it?" Polly blinked slowly. "We usually don't allow exchanges. Whatever you draw is what you play. But if Mr. Mitt is nervous and easily frightened, well, we could make an exception." Mitt scowled and shot Wright a sharp look. "If you want to switch, go ahead. Don't drag me into it." Davis tugged Wright's sleeve and whispered, "Don't push it. He's clearly interested in Clement." Wright was stunned. Didn't he say she wasn't even as decent as a... You know what? Davis sighed in exasperation. He took one look at her in that dress and changed his mind. "Just shut up, or you'll tick him off." Mitt, oblivious to their exchange, was visibly agitated. He didn't know how to get Polly's attention, and it didn't help that there were so many people around. Otherwise, he might have just grabbed her chin and forced her to look at him. Before the performance began, they had to pass through a hidden hallway. Mitt seized the opportunity, stepped beside her, and whispered, "Miss Clement, if I pass the test, may I take you to dinner?" Only then did Polly notice his behavior, how he kept staring at her, fidgeting with his nose. So, he'd been trying to flirt? She had thought he wanted to hit her. After all, he'd written half the nasty critiques about her in the papers. "Isn't it a little early to ask that?" Polly said innocently. "You haven't even taken the test yet." Mitt stepped closer, his breath brushing her face. "I just want to guarantee..." Apparently, he'd even rinsed with cologne. His breath carried a refined scent. Polly felt genuine disgust. And then, a jarring thought popped into her head. If Erik were the one leaning in like this, would I feel disgusted? Not at all. She'd probably find it thrilling. She'd want him closer, close enough that his breath and body pressed against hers. Polly had never figured out what she felt around Erik. Was it fear or attraction? Maybe both. After all, who could say where attraction ends and danger begins? Polly had no aversion to romance. Her attitude was simple. If it works, great. If not, move on. If Erik liked her, she'd be happy to have a relationship with him. But did he like her? This was the world of the Phantom of the Opera, and Erik was the male lead. Whether in the original or horror versions, he was destined to fall for the heroine, ready to kill for her. Polly didn't think poorly of herself. She had a bit of talent, sure, but next to Erik, she was nothing. He was a fictional character. No one could outsmart a fictional genius. Her singing voice wasn't special either, not even half as good as the soprano he once mocked. Would a man like that ever fall for her? The way he looked at her, sometimes cold and terrifying, sometimes dark and burning with something she couldn't name. It was like a storm of repressed rage or ravenous desire. Polly couldn't read his mind. She didn't know if he wanted to embrace her or kill her. She zoned out for too long. Mitt mistook her daze for emotional reaction and pressed again. "Miss Clement, you haven't answered me." Polly looked up at him. She disliked this man. Shallow, smug, married, and still trying to seduce her. She hadn't forgotten how he had insulted her in the newspapers. But if she smiled now and said yes, would Erik react? She tilted her head and gave Mitt a sideways glance. The dim lighting made her light brown eyes nearly black, like a feral cat with claws. "Of course," she said with a playful smile. "As long as you pass the test." The words had barely left her mouth A chilling stare sliced straight through her, so intense, so sharp, it pinned her to the floor. Just like the first time she met him, when he tapped her teeth with a knife. Goosebumps erupted down her arms. Her entire body felt like it had been plunged into icy needles. And yet, that familiar thrill returned. Her cheeks flushed. Her breathing quickened. Even now, Polly didn't know whether she liked Erik, or if Erik liked her. All she knew was, she liked the feeling of dancing with danger. Mitt stared into Polly's eyes, and everything he thought he knew about women changed. Until now, he believed that if a woman lost her femininity, she lost the right to be admired by gentlemen. He had strict standards. A woman must be beautiful, gentle, and obedient, always following a man's lead. She must be well-read, but never challenge a man's opinions, manage the household, but never defy a man's orders. His wife met all these expectations. She was the perfect upper-class lady. But after meeting Polly, Mitt suddenly realized, a woman who breaks the rules might be even more alluring. He was willing to admit he was wrong, on one condition, that Polly agreed to become his mistress. He had zero doubt that he could pass the courage test. He glanced around the tavern and found the police had exaggerated. This, not even close to scary. He'd once gone hunting in the swamps, spent the night there, and stumbled upon a gruesome scene, some kind of bloody gang clash. The other gentlemen had refused to investigate, but Mitt had scoffed, grabbed a lantern, and gone in. He found corpses everywhere, blood soaked into the swamp, limbs and organs scattered. Oddly, none had died from gunfire. All their heads had been severed. He had nearly thrown up right there, cold sweat pouring down his back. But the other men had reacted even worse. 2 of them fainted on the spot. Mitt had become known as the bravest man in high society. No way Polly's haunted house could be scarier than that. Just before the performance started, he glanced one last time at Polly. He was determined to have her. Wright and Davis were nowhere near as confident. As soon as they entered the performance space, a chill shot up their spines. The first thing they saw was a wall covered in grotesque exhibits. Closest to them was a slick, jelly-like fetal specimen, no bigger than a palm, but already showing a human face. It looked like it had been cut out with a knife. There were also spirit photographs, exorcism tools, and a mermaid skeleton. They weren't easily frightened, but this still made their skin crawl. "This is blasphemy," Wright muttered. He was a devout Catholic. He'd been raised to believe abortion was a mortal sin. Once pregnant, a woman had no right to choose otherwise. And now Polly had made a fetus into a specimen? His mind reeled. Davis noticed a label under the fetus. This specimen comes from the real-life experience of Emily, the 4-legged woman. In pursuit of profit, the circus manager cruelly killed her unborn child and preserved it as a specimen. Emily. Wright frowned. "Isn't that my character card? I'm playing a woman who got an abortion? That's disgusting." He had never even stepped into the delivery room when his wife gave birth. And now he was supposed to play a woman who lost a child? He felt sick to his stomach. Davis said, "This is Polly Clement's genius. She knew men would be uncomfortable with this, so she put it at the entrance to scare us off. She's not as ignorant as we thought." Wright looked to Mitt, hoping for a strong response. But Mitt, lost in thought about Polly's wildcat-like eyes, responded absent-mindedly, "What do you expect me to say? Don't be a coward. It's just a specimen." Wright felt betrayed. Mitt had gone soft. But with Mitt's superior background, Wright couldn't scold him, so he turned to Davis. "Oh, so now you both admire Clement? Should we just give up now and admit defeat?" Davis rolled his eyes. Wright really had no sense of timing. Mitt was clearly interested in Polly, and now he was going to insult her? "Mr. Wright," Davis said sharply, "Miss Clement is a lady. As a gentleman, have you no decency? Show her some respect." Wright stared at his 2 friends like they'd become strangers. He held back his anger and followed behind them silently. Since entering the performance area, Mitt had gone quiet, deep in thought. Davis took the lead, determined to find clues. "I get it now," Davis said. "Mitt is Marbell, I'm Flora, and you're Emily. We're inside the circus. Escape and we pass the test?" Wright sneered. "You're really getting into character. Already calling yourself a woman?" Davis snapped. "Now's not the time to argue. If you want out of here, help me find clues." The 2 glared at each other, tension rising. Davis was about to turn to Mitt for backup, only to find he was gone. Mitt was so lost in thoughts of Polly, he didn't care about the bickering. He didn't even say goodbye. He just left. Neither of them were his equals in background or education. They'd only slow him down. He headed straight to the second floor. The first floor was just set up. Circus backstory. Nothing interesting. Clues would be upstairs. Sure enough, he found a corpse in one of the second floor rooms. It looked disturbingly real and reeked. His stomach clenched. Still, he stepped closer. The face was bloated, skin stretched thin like paper, ready to burst. Its mouth, nose, and eyes were crawling with white maggots. Mitt gagged. His interest in Polly dipped sharply. If she wanted to be his mistress, she'd need to agree. No more disgusting stuff. And this tavern? He'd have to shut it down. Way too improper. The only thing he'd allow was her men's clothing. The image of her striding around in trousers and a shirt made his throat go dry. He wanted to pass this test even more now. But there was nothing else in the room. Was the clue inside the corpse? He didn't want to touch it, but after searching the room and finding no tools, he had no choice. With gloved hands and a grimace, he searched the body. Then, something felt off. The body had moved closer. Probably just his imagination. He had already checked for strings, traps, or mechanisms. Nothing. Still, no clue. Mitt cursed and turned to leave. Suddenly, from the hallway, a creaking sound. Wheels rolling across the wooden floor. His spine turned to ice. He told himself it was fake. Just a prop. But that hallway was pitch dark. So was the room. Why the wheels? Was something coming? Was the corpse about to get up? He was drenched in cold sweat. Then it hit him. His character Marbell used a wheelchair. The air around him grew colder. Suddenly, something touched the back of his neck. Like a block of ice shoved into his skull. His muscles seized. He shivered violently. There's someone behind me. He repeated in his mind, it's fake, it's fake, it's just acting. Who acts in a circus? Lower class people. Laborers, vendors, immigrants, the kind of people who would shine his shoes if he asked. Why should I be afraid of them? They should be afraid of me. He forced composure, scoffed, and turned around. Is that all you've got? Meanwhile, Wright and Davis were already out. After realizing Mitt had vanished, they ran around like headless chickens and ran straight into Theodore and Emily. They were in the middle of the bloody leg to sawing act. Wright and Davis froze in terror. Then, as blood and flesh splattered onto their faces, they broke and vomited violently. A flash. The reporter caught the perfect shot. Click. Shutter down. Their horrified expressions immortalized on film. Polly waited and waited, but no sign of Mitt. A bad feeling crept in. Could Erik actually be jealous? Had he made Mitt disappear just because Polly agreed to have dinner with him? She had thought Erik might sulk or interfere indirectly, but not this. She was just about to check on him when a scream. The crowd jumped. Mitt tumbled down the stairs, disheveled, drenched in sweat, teeth chattering. Gone was the gentleman. He looked like a dog fleeing for its life. Upstairs. Upstairs. Everyone swarmed him. What happened? What did you see? It took him a moment to speak. I saw a ghost. A real one. He was everywhere. I couldn't get away. I thought he was an actor, until he tried to kill me. He tried to strangle me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. When I opened my mouth, I saw my lips melting, my tongue, my teeth, all melting. By the end, he was sobbing uncontrollably. The crowd stared, speechless. Sounded more like hallucinations than horror. You don't believe me? Mitt snapped. Where's Clement? Bring her here. Let her explain. If that wasn't a ghost, what is? Polly had been terrified at first. But seeing that Mitt was just frightened, not missing, she breathed a huge sigh of relief. Erik had shown some restraint. He hadn't knocked Mitt unconscious. If two people passed out, the show might be shut down. Still, how did Erik make Mitt hallucinate? Polly walked forward, expression troubled. Mr. Mitt, I'm no scholar, but even I know we should trust science. If we call everything we don't understand a ghost, there would be no trains, no electricity, no phones, no cameras. She stepped aside, revealing the reporters and their cameras. If I could command ghosts, why would I hire photographers? Wouldn't I just have the ghosts take the pictures? A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Most still believed in God and respected the Bible, but they also recognized the power of science. After all, without it, they'd never enjoy modern life. But Mitt? A European educated gentleman claiming ghosts were real? Embarrassing. Still, someone voiced a challenge. But Miss Clement, even God can't be explained. Are you saying science proves God doesn't exist? A wave of unrest stirred. You couldn't deny God, not even Darwin did. Polly looked shocked. Why would you think that? It's because of God that scientists were able to create trains and phones and lights. God is omniscient and omnipotent. If he wanted us to believe in science, why would he lead us into superstition and fear? Unless you're saying science isn't part of God's plan? The man's face turned crimson. He had no response. Most were Some thought her logic was shaky but couldn't argue without denying divine will. So they all turned to Mitt. He was the one who brought up ghosts. Polly seized the moment. She gently took his hand. I'm sorry, Mr. Mitt. You failed the courage test. But don't worry. Mr. Wright and Mr. Davis were out even earlier. 10 minutes later, Mitt had calmed down, barely. Face red, drenched in sweat. He knew he had humiliated himself. But he had a plan. He would flip the narrative. He was still a gentleman. Polly would still be drawn to him. If he could seduce her, then dump her, he'd regain his pride. He looked up at her and said softly, I'm sorry I failed, but may I still invite you to dinner? As soon as he spoke, the hallucination returned. In the second-floor hallway, the ghost. Tall, terrifying. A white mask, hollow eyes, a black coat down to his knees, a rope in his hand. Just the sight of the rope made Mitt tremble. His heart thudded against his ribs. Then he remembered. Those headless bodies in the swamp. The torn necks. They hadn't been cut by knives. They'd been wrenched off by rope. Polly's mouth twitched. She hadn't expected Mitt to still be thinking about dinner after being scared half to death. Still, even if he hadn't brought it up, she would have found someone to dine with, just to test Erik's reaction. If a tool offers itself, why not use it? Polly tightened her grip on Mitt's hand and replied with a face full of surprise and emotion. Mr. Mitt, I never expected you to be so forgiving. You're even willing to overlook the fact that I had reporters photograph your breakdown for the circus promotion. Of course I'd love to have dinner with you. Mitt nearly choked on his own breath. He had only invited Polly to dinner. He had never said he was okay with being photographed, let alone those photos being used for promotional purposes. But with everyone watching, he couldn't possibly say what he really meant. All he could do was grit his teeth and swallow the humiliation. Once Mitt left, Polly ignored the gossiping crowd and immediately found the reporter. She urged him to develop the photos quickly and get them published on the front page of the newspaper. Otherwise, once Mitt calmed down, he might try to retract everything. The reporter understood perfectly. This was a huge story. If he could publish the photos before Mitt backed out, newspaper sales would skyrocket. If they were lucky, even the national news agencies might pick it up and distribute the story across the country. The only problem was developing photos took time. After developing, the images had to be screened through a mesh to create halftone negatives, then transferred onto copper plates, which were finally installed on the printing press. It was an extremely complex process and would take at least 2 to 3 days, even under ideal conditions. Polly needed to stall Mitt for 2 or 3 days, just enough time to get the papers printed and circulated before he could react. Luckily, she also needed Mitt as a tool to gauge Erik's feelings. If the paper was published and Erik had reacted by then, it would be a double win, at least for her. As for what Mitt might win, that was anyone's guess. In excellent spirits, Polly politely asked the crowd to leave. Many people asked her when the circus would officially open. They wanted to test their own courage too. After all, the 3 most famous gentlemen in New Orleans had all failed Polly's courage challenge. If they could pass, wouldn't that prove they were braver than the elite? Polly had expected this. With a gentle smile, she said, "Please be patient. When we officially open, we'll make an announcement in the papers. And by then, we'll have better hospitality. Complimentary drinks for all guests." The crowd buzzed with excitement. Free drinks! That was even more tempting than the courage test. A nearby police officer cleared his throat awkwardly. Polly immediately adjusted. For safety, each guest will be limited to 1 small drink. She wasn't about to let a bunch of drunks ruin the place. In fact, she planned to start researching how to water down the alcohol. Still, the anticipation for the circus show was sky high. Even after the crowd had mostly dispersed, whispers and chatter continued in the streets. Though the 2 test runs had brought the circus unprecedented publicity, Polly had also realized a problem. The performance needed to be shorter. Originally, she had scheduled the show for 3 hours, but these so-called brave gentlemen were being scared out in less than 10 minutes. She wasn't trying to be greedy, but she seriously considered shortening the show to 10, maybe 20 minutes, max. Just enough time for them to recover from the fright and avoid puking all over the floor. The success of scaring those 3 gentlemen thrilled all the performers. Even Emily, normally cold and distant, was smiling faintly. Earlier, hiding in the secret passage, she had heard Wright's sneering remarks about women who had abortions. His disdain had rattled her, dredging up all the shame and pain she had tried to bury. But just a moment later, she heard him screaming and vomiting, trembling like a leaf, and all he had seen was a staged illusion. The blood, the flesh, the saw, the screams, all fake. But Emily's 4 deformed legs were very real. She had nearly lost them to a real saw. So, that's a gentleman? Crude in speech, weak in courage, even weaker than her little finger. Why had she ever cared about people like that? Polly noticed that Emily's entire demeanor had changed. She used to wear the expression of someone ready to give up on life, sullen and blank, like she might jump off a building any moment. Now, though her face was still pale, there was a new strength in her gaze. It was as if she had drawn power from the gentleman's fear and grown tougher. Polly looked from Emily to Marbelle and Flora. Marbelle had always been strong, never resigned to her fate. Flora, still a cheerful little girl, had neither been cherished nor deeply hurt, and she remained carefree and innocent. When Polly formed this circus, it was never out of a desire to save anyone. She just wanted to survive under Erik's control. She needed freak performers, and these women just happened to be available. But somehow, her actions had brought positive change into their lives. Polly suddenly felt a strange sensation, something hard to describe. Like a wave of clarity struck the back of her head. Suddenly, everything around her felt real. The air, the floor, the joyful people before her. More real than anything she'd felt before. Emily, Marbelle, and Flora noticed her expression and came over to hold her hands. Their palms touched. Their warmth was real, more real than anything before. Polly lowered her head and felt her hands heat up, almost burning. She was actually blushing, a rare occurrence. Her shy moment didn't last long. Auntie Freeman came upstairs with a mop and bucket, swiftly beginning to clean. So all this mess is from those so-called gentlemen? She clicked her tongue. Miss Clement, I don't mean to complain, but next time they come, can you ask them to eat less before the show? We saw everything they ate and it wasn't pretty. The whole room burst into laughter again. Just then, Thorne appeared to inform them that dinner was ready. Polly had nearly forgotten. Erik hadn't shown up at all. It seemed like he'd vanished right after scaring Mitt. She told the others to go ahead without her, and went upstairs alone to find Erik. There were no signs of a struggle. Mitt had stood no chance against Erik, just got scared and broke down. At the end of the hallway, Polly spotted 2 rollers on the floor. In hypnosis, triggers like sounds, smells, visuals, or music could all serve as cues. Erik had probably used those rollers to guide Mitt into a hypnotic state. She stepped into the room where Mitt had been. Of course, the corpse inside was fake. Erik had somehow replicated the texture of human skin and concocted a scent nearly identical to corpse rot, indistinguishable from the real thing. Polly looked around the room. Water dripped from the ceiling, evidence of melting ice. The tavern had a basement ice house, so making ice was easy. Erik had added several ventilation holes to the ceiling and placed ice blocks above them. Using basic physics, cold air sinks, hot air rises. He had rapidly lowered the room temperature. Without this chilling mechanism, Mitt would never have been frightened so quickly. Polly calculated the cost of making that much ice. Unless the guests were especially troublesome. Better not use ice next time. Save where you can. She was so deep in thought, she didn't notice the tall shadow standing at the door. When she came to, Erik's figure was looming right over her. He stepped forward, eyes sharp, more aggressive than ever before. Polly instinctively stepped back, bumping into the desk. "You're here," she said. He didn't reply, kept approaching, his knee bumping against hers. One more step, and he'd be between her legs. This was the first time he'd ever shown this side of himself. Polly's heart pounded in her throat. Her legs went weak. This is too much. Agreeing to dinner with Mitt had definitely been the right move. Erik stared at her, his gaze slowly trailing downward, until it landed on her lips. He paused for a second, then quickly looked away. This day had been a total victory. Everything had gone exactly as he had dreamed. He didn't need to show his face, just a few tricks behind the scenes, and he'd brought false gentlemen to their knees. The world had finally witnessed his brilliance. He didn't need the spotlight. He preferred the shadows. And Polly had given him that. She had fulfilled every one of his desires. So why was he still so angry? Why did he feel so unsatisfied? He stepped closer. Polly's face flushed, her breath quickened. She looked excited, but she was actually terrified. She was scared of him getting too close. And she had every reason to be. He had tried to choke her before, tried to kill her. Almost instantly, his thoughts turned to Mitt, that irritatingly handsome gentleman. Had she feared Mitt's closeness? When Mitt had leaned in, his breath clouding her face, she hadn't pulled away. She had smiled. A stranger's breath had entered her lungs, swirled inside her, and left through her lips. Breath had no form, yet Erik could see it, feel it, and his blood began to boil. His chest heaved, his heart slammed in his ribcage. Was this rage? Was it bloodlust? Or was it jealousy? Dizzy, reeling, Erik suddenly snapped, grabbed Polly's jaw. She didn't resist. She tilted her head up obediently. He saw her lips, her tongue. All he had to do was bend down and kiss her, pour his breath into her mouth. And then, a voice whispered inside him, "Is that really what you want? Just for her to breathe your air? Or do you want her to breathe your tongue?" The thought burned him like fire. He let go of her jaw, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. He stumbled back, but once the thought had begun, it wouldn't stop. Everywhere he looked, he could hear the wet sounds of her lips, her tongue, tormenting his nerves. A painful ache bloomed in his chest. A thirst, one that could only be soothed by kissing her, deeply, violently, endlessly. He stepped back again, but the fantasy only darkened and spiraled deeper. She was going to dinner with Mitt? Then why shouldn't he bruise her lips until she couldn't eat, couldn't swallow, could only breathe in his air? Just imagining it made his whole body burn. He could feel her breath entering his nose, soaking into his skin, seeping into his bones. But then, a thought struck him like ice water. She would never kiss him. Right now, she was only close because she hadn't seen his face. Once she saw it, she would run, avoid him, just like his mother, as if fleeing a demon, as if he were a ghost. Erik remained silent, but his gaze wandered repeatedly across her face. He didn't say a word, yet he stared at her lips again and again, only to quickly look away every few seconds, as if struggling not to fall into temptation. What unsettled her most was the contradiction between his calm expression and the unmistakably sensual path of his eyes. Polly's heart pounded. She nearly blurted out, "Do you want to kiss me?" But she knew if she said that, he'd definitely turn and leave. And then the power would shift back to him. When to meet, whether to speak, would all be up to him. Even without saying a word, Polly could tell he didn't like her going out in men's clothing. Unlike other men, though, he never lectured her about propriety, never told her it was indecent. Instead, those who had stared too long at her legs or tried to get too close to her shoulder, one by one, they'd all gotten unlucky. Sudden eye infections, freak accidents, falling flat on their faces. Until recently, Polly had thought it was just foggy weather or uneven roads. But now, she understood. Erik had been in control for so long, he was used to pulling the strings. Just like when he didn't want her to talk to Mitt, he'd glared at her with such terrifying intensity, as if commanding her every move like a marionette. Polly didn't exactly dislike his need for control. When he tried to dominate her, he became visibly more aggressive. His eyes, his gestures, his presence all turned sharper, more dangerous. And that constant flirtation with the line, on the verge of crossing it, was even more exhilarating than facing death. What she didn't like was how he expected her to just obey without saying anything. Like now, he wanted something from her but refused to ask. What, he didn't have a mouth? He couldn't just say what he wanted? Polly cleared her throat. The performance went really well today. Don't you have anything to say to me? He glanced again at her lips. Congratulations. That's it? What more do you want me to say? His tone was cold, blunt, but Polly didn't get mad. She calmly asked, "Then, do you think I should go have dinner with Mr. Mitt?" "That's your choice," he replied, eyes looking elsewhere. "If you prefer dining with someone who's all appearance and no substance, what can I say?" Normally, Polly would have coaxed him into expressing what he really thought. But this time, she suddenly didn't feel like doing that. If he kept looking at her like that, then he should be the one making a move. So she took a step back and said lightly, "All right then, I'm heading out. I was going to invite you to the celebration dinner at the villa, but since you've never joined us there, forget it." Erik turned to look at her. His throat bobbed slightly, as if he wanted to speak, but he said nothing. Polly smiled sweetly. "Good night. Goodbye." With that, she turned and walked away. Even as she left the tavern, she could still feel his gaze trailing behind her like a shadow. But he didn't call out, not even once. His reaction was so ambiguous that Polly began to doubt herself. What if she was reading too much into it? What if he just happened to glance at her lips, but didn't want to kiss her? Back in the carriage with Auntie Freeman, Polly returned to the villa. Marble and the others had been waiting for her, untouched dinner laid out before them. Polly tossed thoughts of Erik aside and sat down to eat. Under the chandelier, the roast goose, ham, and seared steak looked rich and mouth-watering. On a small grill, skewers of beef and lamb sizzled invitingly. Compared to the bland, skin-on potatoes served at the circus, this meal felt like a world away. The others were great company, but in truth, the one she most wanted to share her joy with was still Erik. He was like a wild stallion, unruly, powerful, unpredictable. He might get her to the finish line fast, or he might break her neck along the way. Still, he remained her greatest asset. Without him, this victory dinner felt a little dull. Of course, no one else knew about his existence. He had never shown his face when coaching the performers, though he seemed to enjoy the food plenty. After eating to about 70% full, Polly excused herself from the table. She brought a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses back to her room. If Erik showed up, she wouldn't mind sharing a drink. Feeling good, she pulled out her backup phone and powered it on, rewarding herself with a couple selfies. Too bad it wasn't a Nokia, or she'd be playing Snake right now. On screen, she wore a short tea green dress and had short, slightly tousled hair. Except for the antique decor around her, she didn't look too different from a modern girl. But on closer inspection, the differences were clear. Most notably, 19th century lighting was just too dim. Modern spaces always felt well lit. Polly hadn't even finished being sentimental when she noticed something strange in the photo. She zoomed in. In the shadows stood a tall, slender figure, almost completely merged with the darkness. Polly. She hadn't been startled in a while, but that image made her heart skip. Just like when a horror game suddenly jump scares you with a pale, ghostly face. Well, to be fair, he was technically a ghost. Even his English name was Phantom. She wickedly thought, should I tell him that on Chinese internet forums, people jokingly call him Rice Bucket? She pretended not to see him, calmly set down her phone, and popped open the champagne. Then she poured 2 glasses. Holding her glass, she looked directly into Erik's shadowed corner and smiled. "Care for a drink?" He looked at her, visibly confused for the first time. Polly was thrilled. Finally, something he didn't understand. Erik took the glass, glanced at her phone, but, true to form, asked nothing and said nothing. He was trying hard to suppress his curiosity. Polly wasn't surprised. He was always like this. Despite all their time together, he had never once asked her where she came from, or why she came up with the idea of opening a haunted house. Polly wasn't the type to pass off modern ideas as her own. If he asked, she would have told him, this haunted house thing? Just a popular activity from back home. But he had never asked. He had never even questioned why she hesitated when someone first called her Clement. All his behavior seemed to say, I don't care about you. I'm not interested. You mean nothing to me. And yet, his gaze lingered endlessly on her lips. It was like he was daring her to step forward, to cross that invisible line. But every time she advanced, he retreated, even vanished completely. Only when she pulled away would he draw near. Polly, uncharacteristically, felt a restless thrill. She wanted to make him curious. She wanted to make him speak. She wanted him to press in close. From now on, she realized this wasn't a horror game anymore. It was a game of balance, a delicate tension. So, after saying care for a drink, she resisted the urge to say more, wanting to see how long he could hold out before speaking again. Turned out, not long. He took one sip of champagne and left. Not even a goodbye. "Polly?" She took a deep breath and sipped her champagne. The urge to make him cave and say something was growing stronger by the second. She drank 2 glasses before sleepiness finally crept in. She changed into pajamas, quickly washed up, and climbed into bed. But all night, she slept poorly. She had the distinct feeling that someone was standing over her, watching. The gaze was so intense, it felt like it could snap her bones. At some point, Erik must have reached out, tilted her chin, and pried her mouth open with his thumb. Polly could smell him. He must have forgotten that he'd recently started wearing cologne. A sharp, woodsy scent, like cypress. It burned her senses and vibrated through her nerves. It felt like he wanted to touch her tongue. Several times he got close, then backed off at the last second. If Polly hadn't been frozen, like sleep paralysis, she might have thought she had dragged him to her bed and forced him into this awkward situation. In the end, he didn't touch her tongue, but he did wipe away the saliva that had accidentally escaped her lips. And afraid she'd choke, he even adjusted her sleeping posture. The worst part? Polly realized Erik had probably spent a long time just watching her drool. Depressing. The next morning, Polly didn't even look at the dress Erik had picked out. She put on men's clothes and went downstairs. Auntie Freeman had already prepared breakfast. 2 slices of toast, fried eggs, roast beef, and a layer of melted cheese. Polly devoured it happily. After breakfast, Thorne informed her that someone from the Mitt household had delivered a letter. Polly opened it. The letter was doused in lavender cologne, overwhelmingly strong and unpleasant. In a tone bordering on groveling, Mitt invited her to dinner at the garden restaurant that evening at 6. Polly said, "Tell the servant I'll be there." Thorne was puzzled, but never questioned her orders. He left without a word. By now, the news of Mitt Wright and Davis failing the courage test had spread across all of New Orleans. People, especially the upper class, were both fascinated by Polly and furious at her. Sure, the 3 gentlemen had brought it upon themselves, but they were still members of the elite. And Polly, just a businesswoman. What could be more terrifying than a common woman publicly humiliating highborn men? It was as if she had slapped every upper-class family in the city, right across the face. And no one could even blame her. Everyone saw what happened. The men had provoked her first. Ordinary citizens didn't see it that way. In their eyes, the gentlemen would go back to their mansions and lavish meals either way. This wouldn't dent their status. But it was hilarious. People were gossiping about it over breakfast. As rumors swirled and newspapers buzzed, Polly's circus became more and more famous. Everyone was waiting for it to officially open. Everyone wanted to test their courage, or at least watch others get scared. At 5:30 p.m., Polly left for her dinner with Mitt. She wore a white suit and a wide-brimmed straw hat. Back at the villa, both Thorne and Theodore didn't dare look at her legs. Polly, unfazed, hopped into the carriage, crossed her legs, and flipped through a magazine. Along the way, she felt many curious stares. Though she had bested those 3 gentlemen, few dared greet her. Everyone had silently labeled her a notorious woman. Only when she lowered her head to read would people sneak glances. Polly paid them no mind. Her thoughts were elsewhere. At this point in history, the war of currents between Edison and Tesla should be underway, debating whether direct or alternating current was safer. In the end, Tesla's AC would win, but her phone ran on 5 volts DC. The problem was, 19th century generators, whether AC or DC, produced dangerously high voltages, meant for industrial machines, far beyond what a smartphone could handle. She needed to find a proper rectifier and transformer to charge her phone. She wondered, was Tesla famous yet? Could she commission him to build a generator? She remembered Tesla never gained as much fame as Edison, likely because he wasn't interested in business, just invention. Edison, on the other hand, was a true entrepreneur, with a keen nose for promotion and profit. He even promoted the electric chair just to smear Tesla's alternating current as dangerous. As a businessman, Edison probably wouldn't care about her weird request. But Tesla? As a scientist, maybe he'd actually read her letter. The carriage stopped outside the garden restaurant. Mitt had been waiting at the entrance for a long time. He wore a tailored black suit, slicked back hair, and under the crystal chandelier, looked strikingly handsome. To be fair, Mitt had classic good looks, like an old movie star. Deep-set eyes, a sharp nose, well-defined features, but for some reason Polly found him utterly lacking in charm. Could intelligence really affect a man's appearance? She had never even seen Erik's face, but every time she looked at him, she felt a magnetic, masculine pull. That kind of mental charisma couldn't be described as merely handsome. During dinner, Mitt droned on about his wealthy, well-connected family. Polly asked casually, "Do you know Nikola Tesla?" "Who?" Mitt asked blankly. "Do you know Mr. Edison?" "Of course," he said proudly. "Didn't think a woman would know about Edison. I thought women all believed electricity was magic. I don't know him personally, but I own stock in his company." Polly quickly praised his insight and urged him to buy more Edison stock. No matter what he heard, she told him, never sell. Mitt, thinking she was impressed, launched into a lecture about electricity. To a 19th century audience, maybe it sounded wise. But to Polly, not even up to middle school physics. She began to reflect. Was dinner with Mitt really worth it? Would Erik even react? For now, all she had gained was a serious case of secondhand embarrassment. Polly continued eating while listening to Mitt brag endlessly, until he confidently declared that Edison invented electricity. At that, she gently corrected him. "Mr. Mitt, electricity isn't something you invent, and Edison didn't invent the generator. The first hand-crank generator was built by Michael Faraday." The air froze. Mitt's speech cut off abruptly. His face flushed deep red, and he seemed to be scrambling to recall whether she was right. Polly quickly finished the food on her plate. Mitt, trying to recover some dignity, said, "You may be correct, but Edison still invented the light bulb. It's understandable people think he invented electricity." Polly tried to hold back, but failed. Actually, Edison didn't invent the light bulb either, but his team did improve it, which helped it become widely used. "Thank you for the dinner. It was very enjoyable." Mitt looked like he had been slapped across the face. His flush turned green with embarrassment. He suspected Polly was doing this on purpose to get his attention. Why else would a woman know so much about electrical engineering? Even he didn't know that much. Convinced she had secretly studied dry, obscure electrical journals just to impress him, his frustration melted. He smiled faintly. Then, "May I take you to dinner again tomorrow evening?" Polly fell silent for a moment. All night she hadn't felt Erik's gaze at all. It was as if he didn't care that she was having dinner with Mitt. Thankfully, her dinner with Mitt wasn't just to test Erik. It also served to keep Mitt distracted so he wouldn't interfere with the newspaper's printing progress. Otherwise, she would have been completely wasting her time. After a moment's thought, Polly said, "Of course." But it felt like she had cast a fishing line into a still deep lake. No ripples, no reaction. Polly was puzzled. Had she misread him? That look he gave her lips, maybe he hadn't wanted to kiss her after all? Then why did he show up by her bed in the middle of the night, brushing his thumb across her lips, even pressing into her mouth? She glanced around the grand restaurant, trying to locate Erik. The place gleamed with gold and crystal. The cutlery bore the Tiffany logo, and the porcelain plates came from Hungary's Herend, painted with vivid robins. Only 2 or 3 tables were occupied, all wealthy New Orleans elites. Though they were surely curious about her, none looked her way or whispered about her. Erik wasn't here, but was he truly absent? Or was her bait not tempting enough? Polly now understood why some people enjoyed fishing. When the line comes back empty, it only makes you want to cast again. Mitt suddenly leaned in and asked softly, "Miss Clement, may I make an improper request? Would you wear a dress to our next dinner?" Polly tilted her head slightly. "Why?" Mitt looked at her hand, then at her lips, and said meaningfully, "Because I've yet to give you a proper hand kiss." At that moment, Polly finally felt his gaze on her again. She still didn't know where Erik was, but she could feel his stare like a needle piercing her back. The fatigue she'd been feeling vanished in an instant. From Mitt's point of view, Polly's face blushed as soon as he mentioned the hand kiss. Clearly, she'd been waiting for this romantic gesture. He leaned in closer. "Or, would you prefer I choose the dress for you? I could have it sent to your home. Just tell me what style you like." The gaze grew even colder. Whoever it belonged to had stopped hiding their presence. The stare was so sharp and angry, it felt like it was about to tear through her skin. Polly understood why. She hadn't worn any of the dresses Erik had picked out for her in days. Even the green dress from yesterday wasn't one of his. It had been custom made by someone else. That kind of green dye contained trace amounts of arsenic. They called them poison dresses. Many women who wore such gowns were fine at first, but after prolonged contact, their skin began to break out and rot. Yet the color was so stunning, people still flocked to it, even knowing the risks. Polly had worn the green dress for the novelty. Compared to other colors, green was more eye-catching and would generate more talk. Of course, she wasn't foolish enough to wear it directly against her skin. She had it lined thickly, added a sheer layer at the hem, and wore silk gloves up to her elbows. Her relationship with Erik was just like the green dress. Dangerous, toxic, but irresistible. That morning, when she woke up, she discovered the green dress was missing. Erik had likely destroyed it. She couldn't help wondering what he had been thinking when he did it. Feeling his gaze now, imagining his thoughts, her palms grew sweaty, and her fingers trembled slightly with excitement. "Anything's fine," she said to Mitt. "As long as it comes from the right person, I don't care what style it is." She meant it. Erik's taste in dresses wasn't always her style. Some were too plain, too pale, like draping a white curtain over her body. But she had never complained. Yet now Erik had clearly misunderstood her. His stare grew even sharper, like it was biting her skin, trying to bore holes into her back. For a few seconds, she even felt a weight on her shoulder, like something had struck her in warning. Polly turned sharply. Only a waiter pushing a serving cart was behind her. Her shoulder must have been bumped by the cart. Mitt immediately stood up and leaned toward her in concern. "Are you hurt? Did he bump into you?" He reached for the waiter. Polly felt a chill wash over her. Erik was truly angry. A terrifying sense of danger surged up her spine, numbing her chest. Her hands began to sweat. This was going too far. It was no longer fun. Polly decided to stop while she could. She dodged Mitt's hand. "No, Mr. Mitt, let's call it a night. I'm tired and would like to go home." Mitt, thinking the waiter had ruined her mood, insisted on seeking justice. Polly didn't bother stopping him. She watched him storm over and demand an apology. The waiter, not Erik, clearly, bowed apologetically. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I think I bumped into you. I was a little distracted. I kept hearing a voice in my ear." Polly waved it off. "It's fine. Don't worry about it." She had to reassure them several times before she could get away from Mitt and return to her carriage. Back in the restaurant, Mitt savored Polly's expression and began fantasizing about what kind of dress to buy her. Her pale skin, faintly translucent veins. He thought a dark green gown would suit her perfectly. Yes, green was toxic, but he had no intention of being with her long term. As long as he could indulge his desire, who cared? He sipped a glass of wine, picturing Polly draped in green silk, melting into his arms. The thought made every nerve in his body ignite. It wasn't until an hour later that he noticed the road outside didn't lead home. He called the driver's name and knocked on the window. "Charles, have you lost your mind? Where are you taking me?" No reply. Mitt opened the window and leaned out, only to see that the driver had vanished. The two horses were trotting forward on their own. The sky had darkened. The fog thickened. Dampness clung to everything. The lanterns on the street only made the darkness feel deeper. A chill crept up Mitt's spine. He felt like he was heading straight toward death. He wasn't one to sit and wait for disaster. Half sober now, he shoved open the front door and climbed toward the driver's seat, when suddenly, someone snapped their fingers beside his ear. Mitt froze. A terrible force seized his limbs. He collapsed back into the carriage seat, paralyzed. Out of the darkness, a black-gloved hand reached in, clamping onto his neck like a vice. His throat cracked under the pressure. The grip was monstrous. At any moment, it might twist his neck clean off. Worst of all, he couldn't even scream. He could only watch in horror as a figure emerged from the shadows, looming over him. The carriage was dimly lit. Mitt couldn't make out the face, only two hollow golden eyes glowing in the dark, like burning embers. He'd seen those eyes before, somewhere, but couldn't remember where. Then the figure spoke, voice cold and clear. "What do you plan to do with Polly Clement?" Mitt thought the question was ridiculous. This man had hijacked a carriage, yet wasn't robbing him? He just wanted to ask. About Polly Clement? But what terrified Mitt even more was, he couldn't stop himself from answering. "I want to possess her." A pause. Then, "Why?" "She's beautiful. Any man would think the same. I want to take her, then discard her. That way, people won't remember I failed the courage test." "Does she know your intentions?" "No," Mitt admitted, struggling to stop talking. "I've hidden it well. I'm young, handsome, come from a good family. She's clearly interested. She even asked me to buy her a dress. A pause. Then, from the shadow, "A dress?" "Yes. A green one," Mitt said. "It matches her pale skin. But more importantly, green dye contains arsenic. She's too clever, too stunning, too unpredictable. If I dump her, she might still sway public opinion. But if her skin rots from poison, if she becomes ugly, people will only remember her as a grotesque slut, not my cowardice." A low, mocking voice responded, "Mr. Mitt, you're the most transparently despicable man I've ever met." Suddenly, Mitt regained control of his throat. He croaked, "You heard my worst thoughts, but that's all they are, thoughts. I don't know what you want, but it must be money, right? I'll give you anything, just let me go." But the man didn't move. He loomed over Mitt and whispered, "Now, you feel hot." Mitt didn't understand, until, a second later, a burning sensation exploded through his body, like boiling blood surging through his veins. The voice continued, "The heat can't escape. It's trapped under your skin, like a swarm of ants crawling beneath your flesh." The tone was low, sharp, each word laced with absolute control. Mitt began to itch uncontrollably. The itching became unbearable. "Tell me," the voice commanded. "What will you do next?" Mitt muttered, "Tear open my skin. Let the blood flow." Permission granted. Mitt dug into his face. His fingernails raked across his cheeks, drawing blood. He shrieked, sobbed, but couldn't stop. Chunks of flesh caught beneath his nails, blood soaking his hands. The man stood silently, watching him, watching as every shred of Mitt's refined facade was torn away. Blinded by pain, dizzy with horror, Mitt's thoughts faded to one desperate truth. "My face is ruined. I'm finished." Polly had prepared herself to be woken up in the middle of the night, but to her surprise, she slept straight through until morning. She couldn't help but question everything. Did Erik sense her intentions, or was she simply not that important to him? Just then, there was a knock at the door. Polly's heart skipped a beat. "Come in." To her disappointment, it was only Auntie Freeman. Seeing that Polly hadn't gotten up yet, Auntie Freeman brought her breakfast on a tray. Polly wasn't fond of eating in bed. It always felt like she'd end up with a mattress full of toast crumbs. But since she didn't have to wash the sheets herself, she went ahead and ate anyway. Auntie Freeman said, "Miss Clement, someone left a gift box at the door with your name on it. Should we keep it?" Polly remembered Mitt saying he'd sent her a dress last night. It was probably from him. She responded listlessly, "Just leave it here." Given Mitt's taste, she wasn't expecting anything fashionable. The breakfast included fried eggs, ham, and cheese toast. Polly had specifically asked Auntie Freeman to buy some Mexican hot sauce. Auntie Freeman had never seen anyone smear hot sauce on breakfast, and muttered to herself as she brought it over. After finishing her meal, Polly opened the gift box from Mitt. To her surprise, inside was a green dress. Not the kind of poisonous Paris green that looked murky and sinister, but a refreshing, gentle shade of pale green. The design was minimal. The neckline, sleeves, and hem were trimmed with pearl white velvet, and the waist was cinched with a white belt. On top of the dress was a card. The note, written in unfamiliar handwriting, read, "This green was dyed with gardenia and indigo. Non-toxic." Polly examined the handwriting carefully. It wasn't Erik's, but the dress was very much his style. In the past, Erik would simply lay the dress on her bed. Why the gift box now? A light bulb went off in her mind. Was he trying to make her think the dress was from Mitt to test whether she'd wear it? Then, why keep his own style? To make sure she'd notice? Erik's mind is impossible to read. Polly stared at the dress for a while and finally shrugged. "Whatever, I'll wear it." She took off her nightgown, put on her corset and petticoat, and slipped into the dress. Admiring herself in the mirror, she noticed her hair had grown past her ears, so she skipped the wig, put on gloves and a hat, and stepped out of her room. She had expected Mitt to invite her out again, like he had the previous days, but the entire morning passed with no message from him. Now she couldn't figure out either man's thoughts. Polly grew worried. What if Mitt suddenly came to his senses and tried to pressure the newspaper into retracting the article? She decided to go check on the newspaper herself. Over the past few weeks, she had learned how to ride a horse, at least the smaller, gentler ones that could handle city streets. But because she was wearing a skirt and rode astride like a man, she drew plenty of gossip. Polly ignored the stares, pulled on the reins, stopped in front of the newspaper office, and dismounted. Just as she arrived, a reporter came out looking for her and was pleasantly surprised. "Miss Clement, the copper plates for the photos will be ready by tomorrow. As long as printing goes well, we can roll them out right away. Oh, and..." He handed her a stack of manuscript pages. "Here's the draft. Would you like to look it over?" Polly flipped through the pages and asked, "Did Mr. Mitt come looking for you?" "No," the reporter replied. He hesitated, then added, "There's a rumor going around the Garden District, but I'm not sure if it's true." "What rumor?" "They say Mitt was possessed." Polly blinked. "Possessed?" "I don't know what really happened," the reporter said. "People are saying his driver vanished and left him alone on the road during last night's heavy fog. He claims a ghost ordered him to scratch up his own face, and he obeyed, howling in pain the whole time. But..." Polly tried to keep her voice steady. "But what?" "But his face is completely unharmed," the reporter exclaimed. "Everyone's saying he was scared senseless by your haunted house performance." Should we include this in the story? At that moment, Polly knew exactly who was behind it. She'd never been sure whether ghosts truly existed in this world, but Erik's abilities definitely went beyond human limits. In modern times, hypnosis was just a psychological tool, used to treat insomnia or anxiety. It certainly wasn't this miraculous. Only in movies or novels was hypnosis portrayed with such supernatural power. Polly wondered if there really were other supernatural forces in this world. Could she return to the modern era? Her mind was a mess of chaotic thoughts. After a pause, she said, "Of course included in the article." Thinking of Tesla and Edison's war of currents had taught her one thing: hype is essential, no matter the era. If hype didn't work, people wouldn't still believe over a century later that Edison invented the light bulb. "Get ready," Polly told the reporter. "Soon, someone will accuse my show of being unsafe. They'll use the possessed Mitt incident to try and convince the city to shut us down." The reporter hadn't thought that far ahead. "What should we do?" "Prepare these 3 points," Polly said. "First, our performance is 100% safe. Actors will never touch the audience. We welcome any and all inspections. If an actor does make contact with a guest, we'll compensate $10 per incident. Props are excluded from this policy." The reporter hesitated. "Isn't that a little overconfident? If no one's touching the guests, how are they supposed to get scared?" Still, Polly paid him well. As a full-time ghostwriter at the paper, he wasn't about to argue with her logic. "Second," Polly said, "we're shortening the performance to 20 minutes. Anyone who clears the game in under 8 minutes will win a $500 reward." What the reporter nearly choked. $500? Why was he writing articles? He should just go beat the haunted house instead. "Third," Polly said, "every week we'll publish a leaderboard outside the tavern showing each guest's completion time." The reporter immediately grasped her intent. Right now, people were excited about the show because Mitt, Wright, and Davis had all failed. With the leaderboard, even if new guests didn't finish, as long as they lasted longer than those 3 gentlemen, they could claim to be braver. He felt his blood boil. With these 3 strategies, who would still care about supposed safety concerns? In fact, anyone criticizing the safety of the show would just be giving her more publicity. The reporter looked at Polly with admiration. He was dying to know how she could manipulate public opinion so skillfully. Polly was a little surprised herself. How had she come up with so many cunning tricks on the spot? No contact guarantee, makes it seem safe and fair, 8-minute prize, sparks competitive attempts and repeat visits, leaderboard, triggers people's pride and drives them to prove themselves. All of these were classic tactics from modern game design. Polly shrugged. "Blame modern game developers. None of this is my fault." Now that Mitt was possessed, there was no need to dine with him again, or listen to him brag about his family's legacy. But without Mitt, what bait could she use to lure Erik? Lost in thought, Polly mounted her horse and wandered through the streets of New Orleans. Before she knew it, she had entered the slums, where the road turned muddy and uneven. Men sat on stoops, with half-smoked cigarettes tucked behind their ears. Dogs barked, pigs squealed, and children played in the filth. Women carried baskets of groceries and milk pails on their way home. The slums were near the factories, and wastewater spilled into the streets. People and livestock both suffered from skin diseases, scabies, rashes, making the scene look rather grim. Polly was about to turn back, when she sensed a faint gaze behind her. Erik was following her. Her heart stirred. She gave the horse a gentle nudge and continued forward. The ground was thick with dirty sludge. The horse snorted and stepped cautiously, annoyed. The air reeked of coal smoke, donkey manure, rot, and garbage. Polly sneezed. The moment she did, that invisible gaze intensified sharply. She was fascinated. How could someone's stare feel so tangible? It was like a thread, or a strand of hair, wrapping around her lungs. Every breath tugged on it, causing a faint ache. It was practically violating. Polly didn't plan to linger in the slums, not out of snobbery, but because the stench was unbearable. She was just about to exit the alley when several thugs blocked her path. "Lady," the lead thug grinned, "you've been wandering around here a while. Looking for someone? How about this? You give us a little spending money, and we'll help you find him." Polly had a pistol strapped under her petticoat. She tilted her head, ready to draw it, but then heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned and saw Erik. She hadn't seen him in daylight for a long time. His appearance had changed. He looked almost refined now. He wore a black hat and coat, a white shirt beneath a black vest, and a silver watch chain draped across his waist. His boots were polished black with heavy silver spurs. He pulled on the reins and rode up, his spurs clinking against the stirrups with every step. The sound made Polly's ears burn. People's kinks can be weird. She didn't feel much from his handsome face, but the sharp black gloves, the defined knuckles, the swaying chain, even the clinking spurs. Her heart raced. Erik stopped beside her. His knee bumped hers slightly. His presence enveloped her, not a scent or perfume, but an invisible warmth, undeniably masculine. No odor, yet deeply stimulating. She froze for a moment, then realized what it was. Hormones? Erik glanced at her. Even his gaze carried hormones. Polly felt surrounded by him, her breathing short. The thugs had already shrunk back, intimidated by Erik's towering frame and overwhelming aura. But the lead one, thinking Erik was just a passerby, asked, "You want to play hero for this bitch?" Polly thought Erik would just tell them to scram. Instead, the next moment, he threw a noose, catching the thug around the neck. This wasn't some lawless wilderness. They were in the middle of the city. Polly quickly grabbed his arm. His muscles were so tense, it felt like touching stone. If she hadn't stopped him, that thug would have been beheaded right there. She leaned in and whispered, "Darling, we're in the city. Hold it in. They haven't actually done anything yet." Her use of darling almost made him slip and kill the thug right then and there. Erik froze for a long while, before slowly releasing the rope. The thugs ran off, terrified. Erik said nothing. He pulled his reins and turned to leave. Polly followed on horseback. Once they exited the slums, Erik finally turned his head slightly and said coldly, "Why are you following me? I heard..." Polly caught up beside him, "that Mitt was possessed. So, was it your doing?" she asked. His tone was cold and sharp. "It has nothing to do with you." Ever since realizing he wanted to kiss her, Erik had been gripped by an uncontrollable rage. He had never been impulsive or easily angered, but perhaps age was catching up with him. He had started dreaming frequently, dreams of her breath, her warmth, her glistening red tongue. Every time he woke, he managed to suppress the urge. But lately, he was losing control. Everything she did stirred a violent tremor in his chest. A tremor that made him want to grab her neck, bite her skin, hold her tight until her bones cracked. The day she dined with Mitt, he nearly lost his mind. Even after punishing Mitt, he could still feel that tremor, throbbing through his veins. He had rented a remote apartment on the outskirts of town, no neighbors. The furniture was sparse, with only a grand piano. Breathing heavily, he tried to calm himself with music, but it didn't work. The burning in his blood seeped into the music. It turned wild, chaotic, like a storm. Every note sharp and violent. Then, a loud snap. His strike had been too forceful. The piano strings broke. It wasn't until the next morning that his mind finally cooled. But the guilt and shame of what he had done lingered. The heat was gone, but his hand was still sticky and cold. It felt like he had defiled something. Worse still, that moment of clarity vanished quickly. After a shower, just as he was about to sleep, the rage returned in full force. It wasn't satisfied with fantasy. It wanted to act. He didn't want to spare Mitt so easily, but considering her circus had just started, he allowed Mitt to return home unscathed. Otherwise, he would have torn Mitt to pieces and hung his severed head in the town square. Erik's face was calm, but in his mind he sneered, "If she knew what I was really thinking, would she still dare walk beside me?" Polly studied Erik's expression closely. He didn't stop her from staring. Behind the white mask, his eyes were utterly calm, as if he truly believed Mitt's situation had nothing to do with her. If it weren't for that day, when his gaze kept drifting to her lips, revealing a flash of desire to kiss her, Polly might never have guessed that the man before her had feelings for her. He was simply too good at pretending. "Fine, if you don't want to talk about it, I won't push," Polly said with mock regret. "I'm just curious. If Mitt really was possessed, then who sent me this dress?" Erik's voice turned colder. "You don't even know who sent it, and you dare wear it?" "Of course not," she protested, raising her voice slightly in frustration. "I told you. I thought it was from Mitt. But now that he's supposedly possessed, he probably didn't have time to send it, so who did?" By now, if Erik had even the faintest grasp of human relationships, he'd seize the moment and confess. Instead, he scoffed, "Many green dyes are poisonous. Rather than worry about who sent the dress, you should worry about your health, Polly." If he didn't have such a consistent taste, plain silk dresses with a belt, she might have believed him. But since she knew his aesthetic too well, she had no choice but to drop the topic. She shifted gears instead. "Erik, whether or not Mitt's situation had anything to do with me, and whether or not you showed up today because of me, I just want to thank you. You always step in at just the right moment." She looked up at him. "If one day you ever need help, please ask. I'll do everything I can." Her eyes were a soft, beautiful hazel. Her lashes were long and curled. When she gazed at him so intently, it felt like claws scratching at his heart. Under his black gloves, Erik's fingers began to tremble slightly. He lowered his gaze, avoiding her eyes. He didn't believe she could help him. What he wanted, she couldn't give. What he didn't want, even if she offered, it would mean nothing. "No," he said. "I don't need anything." But as he said it, his gaze once again drifted to her lips. She caught it. His eyes crashed into hers, then darted away like a thief. If he weren't so young and unfamiliar with women, Polly might have believed he was the one casting the fishing line, trying to lure her in. Polly blinked slowly and said, half teasing, "You may think I can't help now, but what if someday you fall for someone? You might need a little advice?" "Enough," he cut her off sharply. His chest rose and fell violently. "I said I don't need anything." Polly said no more. Erik shut his eyes tightly, struggling to understand why everything she said ignited such fury in him, why she drove him to the brink of losing control. And worst of all, in his anger, he felt himself reacting physically. A wave of shame and self-disgust overwhelmed him. He had always hated his body, his face, his hands, his voice. Even his breath, his warmth, his towering height. He wanted to disappear. If he had never met Polly, he would have preferred to stay gaunt and invisible. But ever since she came into his life, he started to want to cover her with his shadow, to touch her with his hands, to surround her with his voice, to let her feel his breath and warmth. Last night, when his thoughts were at their darkest, he'd even imagined marking her with his cold, damp touch, letting her taste the salty, bitter air that clung to him. These thoughts wrecked him. He breathed harder. His pulse roared in his ears. He felt sick. So when Polly stepped toward him again, he recoiled instinctively, barking, "Stay away from me." After she left, a crushing emptiness settled over him. It gnawed at him until he wanted to chase after her, to close the gap, to take her. Take her. That was Mitt's word. So vile, so filthy. Erik never thought such a repulsive word could lodge itself in his brain, spreading like a shadow. When Polly noticed his eyes turning red, she guessed he was deeply affected by her words. She was about to reassure him when he suddenly spun his horse around, kicked it hard with his boot, and rode away. Polly stood frozen, blinking in confusion. She had only meant to tease him, but he really couldn't take a joke. She tugged the reins and wandered the streets a bit longer before returning to the villa. Inside, Emily, Marbell, and Flora were playing cards. Flora, ever bubbly and loud, filled the house with laughter. Even Emily, usually distant, had a rare smile on her face. Thorne was learning to read with Theodore. Over time, Polly had discovered that Theodore wasn't a bad person, just huge and quiet, which made people keep their distance. Polly greeted everyone and was about to go upstairs to shower when Theodore called out to her. He walked over, his 2.4-meter tall frame towering like a mountain. She had to tilt her head all the way back just to see his chin. "Miss Clement," he said, kneeling down and pulling out a gift box. "This is for you. Thank you for everything you've done." Polly was surprised. "Why? Are you leaving?" No, he said shyly, cheeks flushing. "I just wanted to give this to you. I was cold to you at first because I thought you were like Tricky and Boyd. But now, I know better. You've done so much for us. You're a good person, a truly good person. I'm sorry for misunderstanding you." Polly recalled Western etiquette. Gifts were usually opened in front of the giver. She smiled. "No problem. May I open it now?" "Of course," Theodore said, flustered. "It would be my honor." Inside was a wide-brimmed hat, adorned with soft white egret feathers. Polly blinked. If she remembered correctly, egret feathers were incredibly expensive. Only wealthy women could afford to wear hats decorated with them. Seeing her hesitation, Theodore explained, "I found it in the swamp. The hunter probably fled from an alligator or saw a rarer bird and left the egret behind. I was lucky. Before the carcass rotted, I took the tail feathers. I was going to sell them at the market, but since you've been so kind to me, I had a hat made instead." Polly worried he might think she didn't like it. So she took off her current hat, put on the egret feather one, tied the silk ribbon beneath her chin, and smiled. "Thank you. I love it." The egret feathers were thin and soft, like white gauze, framing her eyes with a lively, regal glow. Theodore quickly looked away, flustered. "As long as you like it." Then he nodded politely and went back to helping Thorne with his reading. Polly didn't dwell on it. Emily, Marbelle, and Flora all ran over to admire her new hat, praising it endlessly. Polly beamed, soaking in the compliments, temporarily forgetting Theodore's odd behavior. Back in her room, she stood before the mirror, admiring herself. She did look beautiful. She carefully locked the egret feather hat in the top of her wardrobe, saving it for special occasions. After a shower, she curled up in bed and read for a while before falling asleep. She still remembered how terrified she'd been right after arriving in this world, afraid she'd hear footsteps in the night, afraid Erik might wake her with a blade. Yet somehow she'd come to look forward to his nightly visits. Maybe the stress of the past 2 days was finally catching up to him. For 2 nights now, Erik hadn't come to her room at all. But just as she predicted, the newspaper story finally dropped. That morning, she had just woken up and hadn't even brushed her teeth when Auntie Freeman shouted, "Miss Clement, a reporter is here, says he's got urgent news." Polly wrapped a scarf around her shoulders and sat up. "Let him in." The reporter burst into her bedroom, waving a newspaper. "Miss Clement, the article you predicted. It's out." Polly gestured for him to calm down and took the paper. There it was, front page of the local paper. The headline, in bold block letters, "The circus show that drove a gentleman mad." The subheading, "Inside Polly Clement's circus, the femme fatale's road to fortune." The article began by showering Mitt with praise, his background, manners, and looks, painting him as the perfect gentleman. It made no mention of how he had insulted Polly. Then the tone shifted. No one expected a simple performance to drive such a refined man to hysteria. One can only imagine the pain his family must be feeling. The piece concluded with a call for city officials to ban such dangerous performances. The reporter said anxiously, "Thank goodness I followed your instructions and prepared a rebuttal article in advance. It's already cleared by the editors. It'll run tomorrow in another paper. Otherwise, I wouldn't know how to salvage this mess." Polly calmly folded the paper. "Don't panic. Everything's still under control. This article only seems threatening. In reality, it helps us." "Helps us?" The reporter echoed. Of course it helped. What's the number one thing haunted houses lack? Buzz. Why else would people in modern times buy real haunted houses just to turn them into horror attractions? And besides, Mitt didn't die. He just babbled nonsense from fright. As long as he wasn't seriously injured, any publicity was good publicity. Even if he had died, as long as she wasn't legally responsible, it wouldn't matter. Lately, Polly had been reading American legal texts. While there was no clear provision for defamation, judges often ruled based on precedent and custom. Meaning, if she sued Mitt, Wright, and Davis for their previous remarks in the paper, she'd likely win. Sure, the 19th century imposed countless restrictions on women. No pants, no horseback riding, no going out alone, no premarital sex. But those rules also placed certain expectations on men, especially gentlemen. The most important? Never slander a woman. No matter how outrageous a woman's behavior might seem, as long as she remained unmarried, she was viewed as a delicate flower. a lamb in a fenced garden, and men, seen as stronger in mind, body, and status, were expected to protect women, not attack them. These men had never encountered a business-savvy woman. They never imagined the same social rules that always worked in their favor would one day turn against them. Once she published the court's ruling in her favor, alongside her carefully planted marketing stunts, the haunted house's popularity would skyrocket. At that moment, Polly suddenly understood why she liked Erik. He was dangerous, silent, cold, an untamed beast full of unpredictable aggression. He radiated masculinity. Every move he made throbbed with hormones. And yet, because he had always been rejected and cast aside, he had never absorbed the worst traits of typical men. No matter what she did, he never tried to bind her with societal rules. He saw himself as a monster, not a man. And ironically, that made him the most normal man Polly had ever met, in either the modern world or the 19th century. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nuevi Story. Thanks for listening.